Welcome back to Miller's Movers, episode 3 for this season. Plenty of horses to look at after particularly the showcase meeting at Cheltenham. So we will get straight into it. We should first, though, just touch on Aintree and the old Roan chase, won by Hitman. You'd have to have a heart of stone not to take some joy in seeing this horse win. He's been called plenty of names, and quite justifiably so, I think, because I don't think he's the most resolute in a battle. But this race just played out perfectly. He got a really good ride by Freddie Ginger. The challengers dropped away, jumping 2 out, which meant he didn't really have to absolutely dig in to get to the front. And then once he was in front, he just kept on going. I do, though, hope that this is a sign of things to come. We had a flat season where I thought there was plenty of unexpected results, and I would dearly like for the jump season to follow a little bit more form. And if horses like Hitman are going to be winning, it might be difficult. But let's get into the main thrust of the programme with the movers and shakers. I'm going to try and do these in chronological order, starting with horses going up in the handicap. These are horses that run from the previous Sunday through to the Saturday. So we'll start back at Worcester on Wednesday, I think it was, a 2-mile handicap hurdle, a horse called Lucky Bere for Kaylee Woolacott. Finished third under Harry Cobden, finished with really good effect. This was the first start after wind up, stays on a mark, or goes up, I should say, £1 to a mark of 109. Finished to really good effect here, like I said. And I think going up in trip, this horse is certainly, if he goes up in trip next time out, I'll certainly be with him. Whenever he goes up in trip, I'll be with him. He's a horse that looks like a mark of 109 to meet him, particularly if he continues to show the benefit of that wind surgery. Next on the list, and it comes from Friday at Cheltenham, a horse that I actually tipped up for his seasonal return at Chepstow when he was still going well when coming down, and I don't think he actually made a jumping error. I think he found a patch of false ground and put Mikael Nolan on the floor on that occasion. But French Ship for Philip Hobbs and Johnson White made amends in no uncertain terms in a 2-mile 4 handicap hurdle on Friday. He's got up a fairly sizable £8 from a mark of 128, now up to 136, but I don't think that's going to stop him. He went through the race like much the best horse, quick and clear, perhaps won by a bit too far. If you were connections, you'd have ideally liked to have seen him not be stretched clear for that £8 rise, but he stayed the trip well, but he showed plenty of pace through the race. I certainly wouldn't have any concerns as the ground gets a bit slower into the winter with this horse stepping back in trip, but equally coming into the spring, with a season behind him and starting to relax a bit more, it's entirely feasible that they can entertain going up in trip as well. I think he's an exciting horse, still a young horse, fairly lightly raced. So French Ship off a mark of 136. I don't think that mark will stop him adding to his tally this season. The runner-up in that race also needs a mention. Navajo Indy for Gavin Sheehan, trainer Tom Simmons. Mark of 129 has been adjusted to a mark of 132, so up £3. This was his first try at this trip in handicap company. He'd sort of featured on the SBK podcast plenty last season. I think he even featured in Miller's Movers. Finished to really good effect a couple of times over 2 miles, most notably when third in the William Hill hurdle over 2 miles at Newbury, was virtually tailed off, turning in across the bend at Newbury and flew home. I was desperate for him to step up in trip. He didn't last season. He had his season cut fairly short. But he returned here, first start of the season, Tom Simmons. This is a yard that do not have summer runners. He just doesn't believe in summer jumping at all. So I think these were his first runners for about 5 months. Had 2 runners on the card. They both hit the frame. That's unusual. This is a yard that normally need a run to get them going. So new mark of 132 from Navajo Indy. I don't think that's going to be beyond him. With the benefit of fitness behind him, he just weakened late on up the hill. So Navajo Indy is another from that race with French Ship that should certainly be winning races soon. Perhaps the ride of the day came later on the Friday card. Freddie Keithley on Temps En Temps. Occasionally you see a ride that really stands out. This horse I think was going to win easily, and then coming to 2 out, he lost his back end on landing, slipped out to the right-hand side, lost all momentum, because when they lose their back end from underneath them, they are rear-wheel drive. They get all their power from that back end. Freddie Keithley, very well balanced, gathered up his reins, got him back into contention, and then stayed on strongly up the hill to actually beat Sean Bowen in a driving finish. Not many have done that this season. And the runner-up, I think, gives some validity to the form. He's an 85 rated flat horse, Percy Shelley. He looks to have taken to hurdles well. If you add 40 pounds to a flat mark, you generally find around about what they might be capable of over hurdles. So the fact that Temps En Temps has gone up £9, that's a big rise. 117 now becomes 126. but I think there's every chance he's better than that. And then when you look back in third, the Irish Raider Arch Empire for Gordon Elliott has already got a rating of 126 in Ireland. So I think that de Temps En Temps can win again when going back into handicap company from this novice company. One from the final race of the card on the Friday at Cheltenham, and that's Unanswered Prayers for Chris Gordon. He ran in the amateur chase, 3 mile, 1 furlong. This is a horse that always needs his first run. He's never won on reappearance, and generally he takes a sizable step forward for his second start. He's now just £1 above his last winning mark. He stayed on really well at Cheltenham to run on into 5th. And last year, the yard used this meeting, actually an open handicap chase, to springboard him on into the Southern National at Fontwell, which he won off a mark of 126. He's now up to 127. I don't think that's going to stop him, and I wouldn't be at all surprised. Trainers are creatures of habit if Chris Gordon were now to target the Southern National at Fontwell, which is in mid-November. So Unanswered Prayers might well have a target in the not-too-distant future. I mentioned on Thursday's pod that there was a horse running on Saturday in the novice chase that opened the card at Cheltenham that I had my eye on, that I hoped wouldn't win and might be one to follow going forward. He didn't win. He perhaps ran a little bit better than I expected, and it's double powerful for Neil Mulholland. He's got a £2 rise from the mark of 134 up to 136 for finishing third in that 2 mile 4 handicap chase. Settled towards the rear, as is the way he's ridden. He can be quite free for the early stages, but off a strong pace, which then collapsed at the top of the hill. He closed right up into contention, looked like he was going to go close, jumping the last, and just weakened up the hill. But I think, and I'll mention it in a couple of future horses, Neil Mulholland's horses are perhaps just taking a run to find their straps. A couple got tired up the hill at Cheltenham this weekend. That's not normally something you'd associate with his horses. So I think fitness was perhaps just not quite there. He's a horse that stays well. He jumped really well on this chasing debut. He caught my eye finishing third at Aintree at a very valuable handicap hurdle at the back end of last season at the Aintree meeting. And I think double powerful wherever he goes next, 2 mile 4, 2 mile 5, he'll certainly be a horse I want to be with. And I will probably continue to follow him until I'm very confident that his mark is in excess of what he's capable of. He could be a horse that arrives at Cheltenham in the spring for one of those 3 mile handicaps. A well-handicapped horse as they step him up in trip. So double powerful, was pretty impressed by what he did on chase debut on Saturday, and he certainly won for the tracker. The final horse going up in the handicap, and possibly the most impressive winner on the Saturday at Cheltenham, was Shantou in the Temps qualifier for Emma Lavelle. Harry Cobden in the saddle. He's got a £9 rise up to a mark of 138, winning this off 129. He fairly sprinted up the hill, having travelled pretty powerfully. He had some good novice hurdle form. He did just tail off towards the back end of last season, but Emma Lavelle has a form in good form at this time of the season, and he won very readily indeed. A mark of 138, that would give him 11 stone 9 in the Temps, and with the rejigging of the rules, he's got an automatic spot in the final at Cheltenham on the Thursday. So he could be a difficult horse to assess going forwards. You know, on one hand, maybe they're going to want to protect this mark and go for the big pop in March. But on the other hand, the Stayers Herding division is a very open division. If they feel this horse has got further progress, you know, another £10, maybe a stone of improvement, he'd be bang there in the shake-up of certainly getting in the placings on the last couple of renewals of the Stayers Hurdle. So he's going to be a difficult horse to assess when looking at races going forward. Is he really going to be trying to win races through the winter, or are they going to be trying to protect his mark ready for the spring? But he was very impressive indeed. On to horses going down in the handicap now, and going back to that Wednesday card at Worcester, which opened with a novice chase, weighed out, getting the better of Wendigo. And I think really it was a case of Sean Bowen getting the better of Gavin Sheehan. But the horse that caught my eye was actually finished a little bit further back. It's Excelero under Kieran Gethins for Jane Williams. He's been dropped a pound down to a mark of 121, having run off 122 here. He went far too freely through the race, but he jumped superbly under Kieran Gethins. Got tired late on, which was quite understandable, but was not wholly out of contention jumping the last. But once his winning chance had gone, Kieran Gethins sat up on him. He was beaten a fair distance in the end. But I think a drop back in trip could be the trick for this horse. He's won over 2 miles and 2 mile 2 at Bangor and Exeter. And I think if they can find a race for him and drop back in trip, he's certainly a horse that can win off this current mark of 121. We're only 3 weeks into Miller's Movers this season, but this horse is already featuring now for a second time. Jack Hyde, he ran in the 2 mile Grade 2 novice at Cheltenham, having disappointed perhaps in the Persian War over further, where maybe racing freely compromised his finishing effort. He again ran well in this Grade 2, finished fifth, not beaten all that far. I thought it was a fairly generous move of the handicapper to drop him another pound, down from 123 to 122. I considered him a well-handicapped horse off 1, 2, 3. I know they're toying with the idea of going over fences, but a further drop in the handicap might mean that they just delay that and try and find a pot for him over hurdles. He definitely stays well, but he does race freely, so maybe a stiff 2 miles round stiff tracks like Cheltenham, or an easy 2 mile 4. He won over that trip at Southall, which is a far easier track, would be up his street, but certainly off his current mark of 122, I still think Jack Hyde is a very well handicapped horse, whether that be over hurdles or fences. We'll come on to perhaps the biggest talking point of the handicapping weekend later on, but in the 2 mile handicap chase at Cheltenham, Uncle Phil made his debut for Chester Williams, who had a really good start to his training career, 2 winners from his first 2 runners. Uncle Phil wasn't able to add to that tally, but I thought he shaped with some promise. He jumped pretty well, not always been the case when with his previous trainer, Willie Mullins, but he's got a fairly nice drop of £5 straight off the bat from a mark of 145 down to a mark of 140, which is just £1 above his last winning mark, which came in a fairly competitive handicap chase at Fairyhouse. The ground would have been lively enough for him over this 2 mile trip at Cheltenham. All his best form has come on soft ground, and the majority of his best form has come when going right-handed. Just a suspicion that maybe turning to a right-handed track might see him in better effect. But I thought he showed enough here to suggest that Chester Williams might have picked up a nice horse here. Off a mark of 140, I'll be watching out for him when the ground goes genuinely soft, particularly if he were on a right-handed track over 2 miles. I mentioned that Double Powerful going up in the handicap for a fairly decent run in the opening handicap chase on day 2 of the Cheltenham meeting, the showcase meeting. Another horse that I thought shaped with plenty of promise was Newton Tornado. I felt Ben Jones set fairly ridiculous fractions on this horse up in front. He went far too hard, but Newton Tornado was still going well at the top of the hill when making a mistake in coming down. Of course, too far out to say how he'd have fared. I suspect he would probably have weakened up the hill, having gone so hard early. But he jumped really well in the main. It was an unusual mistake for him to make because he jumped soundly to that point. I think he's going to make up into a better chaser than he was hurdler for Rebecca Curtis, as often her horses do. The handicap has dropped him £1 from 121 down to 120. And I think that'd be racist to be won with Newton Tornado. And he does stay further than 2 mile 4, and he certainly would appreciate getting back on some genuine winter ground. And then the final horse coming down in the handicap is also from that race, the Henry Daly trained Blenkinsop. He's been dropped £2 down to a mark of 120 from 122. He got outpaced coming down the hill on this lively ground, but he stayed on again up the hill. Henry Daly yet to have a winner, and since the start of the winter season proper. He is a trainer that takes his time, quite a traditionalist. His horses are going to improve for a run. Blenkinsop had a bit of an in and out season last season, never really got any real rhythm going, but he stays far further than this 2 mile 4 trip. And I'm sure when he goes over a trip on some slightly slower ground, this Henry Daly trained gelding can certainly win races off his new mark of 120. And then to finish with, we'll have a few non-movers. Again, starting back on Wednesday at Worcester, Secret Vino for trainer Tom Ellis, his brother-in-law Jack Andrews in the saddle, raced very freely through the 2 mile handicap hurdle, settled towards the rear of the field, but I thought he was coming with a run of real contention, turning in, sat quietly, popped away. But didn't seem to be a huge amount of urgency from Jack Andrews in the saddle, eventually ran on into 4th. He wore a hood, didn't seem to help him settle all that much through the early stages, but I thought he had plenty of running left to give. The handicap has left his mark unchanged on 93. Wherever he turns up next, I'd be very interested in him, and I think a mark of 93 underestimates this son of Schiaparelli's ability. Back to Cheltenham for the last few, and starting in that handicap hurdle over 2 mile 4, won by Friendship. Last Rodeo, he was beaten around about 20 lengths in the end, but he was given a very patient ride out the back on his first start of the season for Christian Williams, Jack Tudor, who was making some quite nice progress when getting hampered by the faller coming down the hill. He again gathered himself up and stayed on fairly nicely, if unspectacularly, up the hill. I think he's going to stay far further than this. He's got a nice mark of 118. When you go back to his maiden hurdle form, that certainly looks a workable mark. And when the genuine soft ground comes, already a winner at Lingfield on soft ground in his novice hurdle, I think that Last Rodeo will leave this mark of 118 well behind him. Also in that race, and perhaps slightly difficult to assess because he departed fairly early on before the race had really got into contention, was the expensive one for the Twiston Davises. James Turner in the saddle. He made a mistake at 3 out, still travelling well at the towards the head of affairs, tanking along, made a mistake. As he pecked on landing, the saddle slipped away to the right, and James Turner felt that the most sensible course of action was to pull him up and take him off the course. It's too far out, as I say, to say how he'd have fared. The race was only just developing, but he still travelled with some real zest. He's only got a mark of 111, which remains unchanged. That sort of mark is going to get him into some fairly moderate races, not necessarily Saturday races. And I'm sure the Twiston Davises will win races with the expensive one. And then finally, and perhaps the most important talking point of the weekend and the handicap movers, is Unexpected Party for Dan Skelton. He ran in the 2-mile handicap chase, which they won with stablemate Calico. Ridden by young Harry Atkins, who's a £7 conditional, claims the full £7. That gives you an idea as to how inexperienced this boy is. He's sadly got a 10-day suspension for not making a reasonable effort, the stewards felt. They felt that he'd ridden in too patiently out the back and hadn't made sufficient effort up the home straight. So he's been banned for 10 days. The handicapper was asked to give evidence and has left his mark unchanged on 149, which is effectively saying that he's not paying any attention to this and wants them to run again. I think this is going to be a theme now throughout the winter with this horse. I think if you followed racing in any degree of detail, you'll know that this horse is going to be targeted at the Grand Annual, which he won 2 years ago. He ran well in it last year at the Cheltenham Festival, and they're going to want his mark down from 149, certainly towards 145, maybe a little bit lower than that if they can. I'd actually reach out to the BHA for a comment because I felt it was slightly unreasonable that Harry Atkins, who's attached to the Skelton yard, clearly was riding to instructions to settle this horse and not give him a hard time, copped the 10-day ban fairly early on in his young career, whilst connections in the horse remain unpunished. You've seen before, horses that haven't made sufficient effort have also been subject to a ban themselves. So be interesting to see where this goes now with Unexpected Party. Do the Skeltons have to try a little bit harder with this horse? Are they going to look to explore going up in trip? But at the moment, the handicapper isn't biting. He's left them on 149, and they're going to have to work a little bit harder to get that mark down. So last week, I gave you my first 5 horses to follow for the season. We'll move on to the next 5 shortly. But before I do, I mentioned that Freddie Keithley gave a horse, de Temps En Temps, a very fine ride in the handicap or the novice hurdle at Cheltenham. He's definitely a rider to keep on board in the conditional ranks. But another one who's really caught my eye in the last couple of weeks is Isabelle Ryder, attached to Jamie Snowden's yard. Unlike Freddie, she's perhaps not yet as polished and strong in a finish. But what she does have is an exceptional clock in her head. She seems to be able to position horses very well through a race, and she's exceptional to an obstacle. Hasn't had all that many rides over fences yet, but she's very good to hurdles. She's the sort of rider that when it comes into the depths of winter, when efficiency of racing is so very, very important, that over fences she could come into her own. She still claims the full £7. Jamie Snowden hasn't let her off for many outside rides, but I suspect as she builds a little bit of momentum, she'll be used more regularly, and she's certainly a rider that's more than good value for the £7 claim she currently carries. On then to the final 5 of my 10 to follow for this season. Again, trying to think slightly left field and away from the usual Cheltenham winners that often get turned out. And the first is a horse I've liked and I've mentioned on Millar's Movers a couple of times, Titan Discovery for Robbie Llewellyn. He's up to a mark of 129 now, having finished his season fairly early last season, winning a 3-mile handicap hurdle at Windsor, which was very competitive. Deep Cave, who went on to win at Aintree, he was back in 4th on that occasion. My understanding is that he'll perhaps have one spinner over hurdles to take a bit of freshness off him, but they intend to go chasing with him. He's a big, strong horse. He jumped hurdles particularly well, and if he can translate that jumping ability to fences, I think a mark of 129, now they're convinced that he can stay up to 3 miles, might well prove workable through the season for Robbie Llewellyn. The next one, he starts off on a hurdling career, and it's Sober Glory for Philip Hobbs and Johnson White. Unbeaten in 4 starts, a point-to-point, and then 3 bumpers. Won fairly moderate bumpers at Chepstow and Exeter. At Exeter, he won particularly easily indeed, but then took his form to another level, winning the listed bumper at Newbury. Baron Noir was back in 3rd. He went on to win the Punchestown bumper in May. So the form looks really solid. Sober Glory was kept away from the spring festivals. The connections are pretty convinced that he needs soft ground. All wins have come on soft ground. So expect them to wait a little minute until he makes his appearance. But as soon as we get genuine soft ground, he'll be out in novice hurdles. I think he'll stay very well, but he should have more than enough ability to win a maiden over 2 miles. He's the sort of horse that you could almost imagine going for something like the Tolworth or the Formby as it is now, up entry if they get proper winter ground at that point of the season. So he's certainly one to keep on board and could take quite high rank in the novice hurdles. Perhaps at a slightly lower level is the Jukebox Kid for Ben Pauling. Now, important to stress, this is the Jukebox Kid, not the Jukebox Man. No relation, just obviously latching on to a name. He's only had 2 hurdle starts. He really impressed me at Uttoxeter, where the ground was officially good to soft. But if you remember, that was the Midlands National Meeting. They'd overwatered. The ground was definitely slower than good to soft. And the Jukebox Kid really ground it out under David Bass and was, I thought, quite a gritty winner for a horse having his first start in hurdle company. He then went to Ayr for the Scottish Grand National Meeting and ran a novice hurdle up there. He disappointed. He was 3rd of the 3 runners, but the Pauling yard was struggling for form at that point. And the very fact that he managed to get that run in, just 3 runners, he's finished 3rd. He's been given a handicap mark of just 122. He'll go novice chasing. And he's the sort of horse that will stay 3 miles. He'll appreciate desperate ground, and I think he'll win more than his share of races this winter. Perhaps a slightly higher class of horse, again, shifting, I think, to novice chases, is Beat the Bat for Harry Fry. I was slightly frustrated with the campaigning of this horse the early part of last season. They seemed reluctant to step him up in trip, but it could be that, like so many trainers, they were trying to keep back a little bit of improvement for the spring festivals. He ran really well to finish 4th in the Coral Cup, which I thought was a very competitive race. He stayed on well up the hill, and they then stepped him up in trip even further to just under 3 miles at the Punchtown Festival. He finished 5th behind Jericho de Repine. Perhaps didn't see out the 2 mile, 7.5 furlongs as it officially was, quite as well as he had at the 2 mile 5 of the Coral Cup, but he's certainly got plenty of stamina. And I think if he goes chasing off a mark of 135, he did jump hurdles particularly well. He could well be an interesting horse to follow and might well be one for the handicaps come the spring. And then the final horse is Kepler's Law, now in the care of Christian Williams, formerly with Laura Morgan, for who he absolutely obliterated a field at Leicester in a novice hurdle. The runner-up, Benevento, is rated at 117. He put 30 lengths on him on heavy ground at Leicester. Now, Leicester on heavy ground can throw up strange results, but I just loved how this horse went through the race, and the runner-up certainly should have appreciated the ground as well and was well and truly put in his place. Kepler's Law had 1 final start. He perhaps disappointed slightly when only 8th in the EBF final at Sandown. That's a pretty competitive race. The ground maybe wasn't slow enough, but I'm also led to believe that he picked up a small injury in that race, which is why he'd not been seen since. Now with Christian Williams, so I think he's set to go novice chasing. This is a horse that has a huge engine. He's got a mark of 127. We know that Christian is excellent at placing his horses, so Kepler's Law could well be set for a good season over fences. So that's it for this episode of Miller's Movers. Be sure to check out the feature that we recorded last week at Christian Williams Yard, which is up on YouTube tonight, a National Hunt preview with a little bit of a difference. Hopefully you'll find that interesting. I'll be back same time next week with another episode of Miller's Movers.